All right, so Unit 4, Political Beliefs and Behaviors and Linkage Institutions. So we'll get started here looking at political beliefs and behaviors. So first thing, political culture. And it's basically when you take in the entire concept of what Americans and people believe in general as far as the role of the government and the values that are important to them within the government structure and that relationship between government and those that are governed. So some of the highlights: majority rule, free elections, equality in law, private property, and individual freedoms drive really our political culture. So then you take political socialization, which is where you begin to take that political identity and you pass it on from generation to generation, how that impacts. And just a good reminder is that the number one impact on your political identity and ideology is going to be your parents. As time goes on, there will be more factors that play a role in what you have, but in the end, your parents play the biggest role. All right, so public opinion, it's basically what drives a lot of issues as far as what's important to the government, as far as topics and issues that they want to address, and really has an influence on the policies that are created during, a congressional session, things of that sort. So, important thing to remember as far as how we measure public opinion is going to be through polling. George Gallup is a name we need to be familiar with, and we need to understand that the cleanest way and fairest way of creating a poll is using randomized sampling. Okay, it's a randomized sampling. Randomized sampling is going to be that fairest way of creating a poll that measures public opinion on either issues or on candidates. So political ideology is that set belief that basically what you think are important issues, how public policy should address those issues, all those things created reflect your political ideology. So a couple of things to remember about the political spectrum. We look at far left, far right. We're looking at radical. They're the ones that go beyond the vast majority of the population in their views. It can be radical left wing, it can be radical right wing. And so those are elements within the political spectrum. Liberal, it's the concept of change and having more involvement. A moderate belief really has beliefs that kind of fall on both sides. They might believe in some liberal views towards maybe a social program or something of that sort, but then may have a fiscal leaning towards a conservative idea. And then conservatives are the ones who want limited government intervention and reverting back to traditional lifestyle and traditional ways of life and the concepts of going back to maybe the way things used to be. And then your reactionary are the ones that kind of are taking beyond the conservative concept of the way it used to be and going further back into the old school. So political parties themselves, we have a two-party system in this country. There are third party or fringe parties that do play a role in the political process, but for the most part, we have a two-party system. Your minor parties or third parties have very little impact on elections. It's very rare. So what do parties do? The parties are the ones who are going to go out there and they're going to recruit candidates. They're going to try and accomplish their two main goals, which is win elections and control the government. And how they do that is through these processes. Party identification, what tends to drive it are the ideology, income, race, religion, region of the country. All those things are important. You need to remember socioeconomic status as far as if they're going to be more Republican or Democrat. Minorities tend to vote Democrat, whereas Protestant white males and females will vote more Republican. But women in general do vote more Democrat overall. But all these things play a role. Marital status has a little bit of a impact on it. Usually if you're single, it could have an impact as far as maybe having more liberal leaning. But as far as the marriage itself impacting, it's not going to have that great of an impact. So why do we have a two-party system? Well, we have heritage of the Whigs and Tories. and became the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. But then our electoral system, the fact that it's a winner-take-all system, it's single district winner-take-all, and then the Electoral College really lends itself to a two-party system. And so because of that, very rarely do you see third-party candidates play a role in an election. Until those things change, you're going to maintain the two-party system. So electoral de-alignment and realignment. So instead of creating a third party, what is a growing tradition and what is happening in our country is we see this rise of de-alignment, this concept that people are going to disassociate themselves with political parties. About 40% of Americans fall within that category at this current time. Realignment is where we see that shift of people who generally vote for one party. A social group will transition away from voting for that one party, and we'll see that shift. Republicans, you began to see a shift in the 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln, but even closer to now, you could say during the 50s and 60s with the Dixiecrats leaving the Democratic Party and joining the Republicans, to where now, where Republicans used to live in what were blue states, such as the West Coast, Northeast, Midwest. Republicans now live generally in the South and a few other states that are smaller, but for the most part, Republicans make up a large chunk of the southern states. Democrats, they made the shift during the Great Depression. A lot of the programs that were developed during the New Deal benefited those that lived in urban areas, and so we see the Democratic Party have a massive presence in urban areas. So voting in elections. So again, elections are considered a linkage institution. They basically are what drive our political process. And literally a lot of the focus of politics comes around the concept of participation in elections and the buildup of a campaign and it leading to that final election. So, issue or policy voting. So you have a way of voting. So a couple of things here. So we have direct primaries. Direct primaries will allow citizens to directly support or identify candidates that they want to run for office. So it could be an open primary, closed primary, but the concept is that people are directly electing those that are going to represent parties in a general election or a midterm election. This has changed the structure of political parties in our country. A recall vote is the idea that they can have a special election to recall an elected official, to attempt to remove an official from office. Referendum is a vote that allows for the citizens to directly vote on that issue that has been proposed by the state legislature or a legislative body. And then initiative is where the voters actually petition and develop their own legislation, and it's placed on the ballot, which allows for voters to vote on a proposal from other citizens. So a characteristic of the American voting public is that we have a low voter turnout. Now, voter turnout for presidential elections is much higher than midterm elections, but you're talking 58% is a high turnout for a presidential election. Midterm elections, you're looking at 38 to 39% being a high turnout. So when you compare us to the rest of the industrialized world, we rank around 27 as far as other industrialized nations. So we are extremely low on the rating scale as far as percentage of eligible voters who actually show up and vote when we have our elections. So what's led to that? Well, first of all, there were attempts to fix the problem, and that was to expand the electorate. So we've had a number of different amendments that have expanded the electorate, such as the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 23rd Amendment, and the 26th Amendment. All those were attempts to expand our electorate. But the reality is that political parties have failed to mobilize voters. You see this movement of de-alignment. There's really very low political efficacy. There's very little difference between candidates according to the voters. There's a growing mistrust of government. And because of the low level of political efficacy, we have apathy developing within our voting population. And then you see approval ratings of Congress in the 20s. And so satisfaction with the way things are is leads to people not really wanting to go out and vote. And the fact that we have it on a Tuesday during the week, it's not a very convenient process. Early voting has helped with voter turnout, but nonetheless, voter turnout is still exceptionally low in this country. So, what types of elections do we have? We have primary elections, so you have your closed and your open primary. You want to make sure you understand that. Remember the blanket primary? It's the nonpartisan blanket primary, the jungle primary that we saw or that we see in Louisiana, where everyone votes. It doesn't matter about a party affiliation. And then a runoff primary, which is basically if no one receives over 50% in a blanket primary or closed primary or open primary, then you have to have a runoff of the top two winners. It's very similar to the special election that we're seeing in District 6, but this election in District 6 is not a primary, it is an actual election. General elections are where you see the largest turnout. General election means you're going to have the president being involved in the election process, okay? When the president is elected, it's the Electoral College that will vote. Remember that the reason why there's 538 electoral votes is because you have a vote per district in the country and you have a vote per senator. And then with the 23rd Amendment, we've added the 3 electoral votes for Washington, D.C. So it's a winner-take-all method. So you can win whoever wins the majority of the vote, the popular vote based off of that. That's who wins all of the electoral votes. Okay. And then 270 is your winner. If there is no winner, remember the House of Representatives will call a special session, and what will happen is they will, per each state gets one vote, they will vote for the president, and then the Senate will choose the vice president. A couple of pieces of legislation in a court case you need to remember for campaign finance, which deals with elections. The Federal Election Campaign Act creates the FEC. The FEC is responsible for overseeing and conducting investigations into campaign finance and leads the charge as far as campaign finance reform. It's made up of 6 members. 3 must be part of one party and 3 part of another party, so you can't have more than 4, or more than 3 from the same party. So it's a 50-50 cabinet. They are independent, really, from the process of the election, but they are there to serve as an independent regulatory commission. Then the court case of Buckley versus Valeo. This deals with the fact that if you wish to pay with your own money for your own campaign, you cannot be restricted. Interest groups in the mass media. Let me go back to this, though. Let me reiterate. Make sure you understand Citizens United, the court case, and then also the BCRA, so the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. Make sure you take a look at those things. Those are important cases and pieces of legislation dealing with campaign finance. Interest groups in the mass media. Because of the rise of interest groups, we've seen them play a larger role. We've seen super PACs step in, and as long as they disassociate themselves with a candidate, they can play a major role, and they really have no oversight as far as the role that they can play within an election through negative campaign ads and so forth and so on. Remember that there are different types of interest groups. You have economic interest groups where they're worried about the economic future of their members. So keep that in mind also. All right, I'm going to do Unit 5 here, and we'll be done with our review. As always, you can come by and ask me questions if you have them.